Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here. In the last couple of days, Blizzard pushed apparently a hotfix to PTR, enabling the new Warlock Covenant Legendaries for 9.1 PTR. So today I want to talk to you about all four of them. I have three characters made: a Necrolord, a Venthyr, and a Night Fae. I don't have a Kyrian Warlock made, but the Kyrian one is sort of mediocre anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. But these legendaries are pretty interesting, have a lot of unique interactions between, I guess, different talents, different abilities, traits, trinkets, whatever, what have you. And I think we're going to see a decent shift in the damage profile of Affliction, as well as potentially Destruction for Night Fae, and well, maybe a little bit for Venthyr if it's actually good. And well, Necrolord is still in a awkward spot, but we'll get to that. Any weak auras, profiles, or add-ons you see here, you can get for free off my Twitch. If you want to swing by, hang out, feel free to do so. Also, heads up, quick shout out, thank you so much to all my patrons for all the support, truly appreciate it. The 9.1 Warlock Sanctum Domination spreadsheet is indeed now live. Tier 3 Felgar rank my Patreon or higher gets early access to that, so if you'd like to check it out, feel free to do so. With that being said, let's get into the video, starting off with Necrolord. Okay, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Necrolord Legendary, it is Shard of Annihilation. Decimating Bolt also increases the critical strike chance by 100% and the critical strike damage by 50% for Incinerate. Now, this works for Incinerate, this works for Demon Bolt for Demonology, this works for Drain Soul, and Shadow Bolt for Affliction. Now, spoilers ahead, for Demonology, it's still not very good because the modifiers aren't multiplicative, they're additive, and they just don't work very well. We tried to make the Demon Bolt build for Demonology work for months now since Alpha, and it's just still not good, unfortunately. Affliction is not bad, but keep in mind, the Withering Bolt Conduit, which, well, was pretty OP, has been nerfed multiple times. This character's also my Necrolord. He's not incredibly geared, so it's a lower conduit level here, but it's been nerfed multiple times. So the multiplicative stacking of this ability and the Withering Bolt Conduit, just the raw power level is not really there anymore. It's not bad, and it will still be a substantial increase, but I think the biggest power, I guess, boost for this legendary lies in Destruction, because Incinerate, fire damage. What buffs fire damage? Roaring Blaze. Now, Roaring Blaze is typically something you see played more in a patchwork or two target setting. You do see it played in Mythic Plus from time to time, and it does offer a lot of consistency from pack to pack. Sometimes you see it played with Kata, Roaring Blaze, Channel Demon Fire. There's a variety of different builds you can run playing Destro in Mythic Plus with a combination of talents in these rows. But Roaring Blaze, whether it's CDF or Dark Soul, typically brings the most consistency in patchwork and two target settings most of the time. So interestingly enough, here's my combat log. Now, the legendary is equipped. Keep in mind that with Roaring Blaze, Incinerate already hits pretty hard. Chaos Bolt's hitting hard as well because it's been buffed multiple times. It's not a wet noodle, it's like a half-cooked noodle at this point. But with this effect being a 45-second cooldown, it's pretty strong. Now, unfortunately, there is one issue with this legendary right now, and you'll see when I go into combat here. We have Roaring Blaze, it's equipped. I'll launch my Decimating Bolt. You can watch my combat log here too. I'll launch my bolt. We'll cast a conflict rate. So you have the stacks here. Crit damage increased by 100%, or chance by 100, and damage increased by 50 for Incinerate. So we'll launch an Incinerate here. Let's get our Roaring Blaze back up. Launch an Incinerate. Look at the damage here. A crit. 9,976. A crit again. A crit again. Okay, so I'm not gonna stop the video. Last night, we'll do it again. Last night, the 100% critical strike chance for this legendary was not working. So you would get the bonus if it actually crit, but you weren't guaranteed the crit chance. So we didn't have Roaring Blaze active for this final cast here. I just cast it to see if it was going to crit or not. So essentially what would happen was your Incinerate would hit for, with Roaring Blaze up, without critting, I guess give or take about 3k. Give or take. If it crit without the buff up, it just crit for about 6k. But if it crit with the buff up, which wasn't guaranteed, you'd have the full 10k, 10.3k hit. These Incinerates are hitting really hard. Keep in mind, a Chaos Bolt hits for what, about, I guess on this guy, about 10k, give or take, without modifiers being active. They're hitting for about the same as a Chaos Bolt, which is really strong. Imagine like your Havoc windows. You have literally conflict rate, spread your Roaring Blaze, bolt, double Incinerate, bolt again. Depending on haste levels, this is a pretty substantial increase for Necrolord Destruction. Let's make sure it works again here. Incinerate should crit. It's not working. We just got lucky. It's not working. So yeah, the first part of this legendary is not working. The second part is. You can see here it dealt about 4,000 damage, give or take. But you can see here, if it actually crits, you would get roughly, you'd have roughly about a 7,200 hit here with this, right? 72? 7,600. 7,600 hit with this Incinerate if it crit, without the 50% bonus damage mixed in. But with it mixed in, you have about a 10,300 hit. So it's a bit wishy-washy right now on PTR. I assume it'll be fixed soon enough, but this legendary has a lot of potential. All three of your Incinerates with Roaring Blaze are going to be hitting for about 10k, give or take. This bolt hits for 9k. This guy might not be incredibly geared, but still, like, it's all relative depending on gearing. This is something I have my eye on for destruction if you're playing Necrolord. Night Fae and Necrolord are very close in Destro sims, but with Necrolord having a tiny bit of an advantage. But losing Soul Shape, losing the AoE, I guess, implications that Soul Rat has for Night Fae, Grove Invigoration, Nia, all the Soul Mines being good. In 9.0.5, I feel that Night Fae is still a little better than Necrolord. But this legendary, with tuning and things, could very well potentially change that. I'm excited for Shard of Annihilation for Necrolord after playing with it. Let's hope the bugs are fixed in the next build. It's got some serious potential. Like I said for Affliction though, this legendary is not as exciting. Like regular Necrolord AF, it only affects one Drain Soul. Even if the tooltip does not say it, it's the same thing. If you cast it, it'll still give you the 3 stack of the actual buff, but casting your Drain Soul will consume the entire stack. Also, interrupting your Drain Soul for half its actual value will still consume the entire stack. So you're still pinned in this weird, I guess, build of Necrolord having to just plant and drain for the actual, like, Decimating Bolt empowerment or the Drain Soul empowerment. It's not necessarily bad. You can see it's bugged here again. It didn't crit there, but I just don't think that it brings the raw value that it does to destruction. Keep in mind also that the current version of AF, playing the Withering Bolt build and having the big Shadow Bolts, or I guess before it got nerfed, was playing Malefic Wrath, the legendary. We can't, unfortunately, play double legendaries now, so that build looked like this. You had Nightfall, SL, PS, either Shadow's Embrace or Haunt, and Dark Soul. But we don't actually have Malefic Wrath anymore. We can't wear 2 legendaries at once. So while this build might sound like on paper like it could be really strong with Shadow Bolt damage stacking effects and such, it's actually just honestly not as strong as it seems. It's a bit unfortunate, but I mean, at this point, my hopes for Necrolord AF, well, they're really just not there, honestly. We can launch a bolt here, see if it crits with Nightfall. Yeah. Even it hit for what, 4,500 with a Nightfall proc. So even if it crits there, you're looking at about 5k crit modifier, about 10k. You're looking, I think, at about a 12.5k bolt, which is not bad, but that's playing Nightfall with Withering Bolt and everything else. Now, if you factor in trinkets and things like that, I didn't pop my badge there, maybe 15k, give or take, but the profile of AF is shifting. AF is not like, it's in an odd spot on PTR, but AF is shifted from being a very good single target spec going into it, to getting Rapture nerfed, to getting Withering Bolt and being the best single target spec in the game, to getting Withering Bolt nerfed multiple times while our dots are buffed. AF has gone from being a single target monster to something that's sort of just like a Council Cleave based spec, which unfortunately we don't really see a whole lot of in Sanctum of Domination. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because just because we don't see it in one raid doesn't mean it's completely irrelevant and gone in the others. Let's talk a little bit about Venthyr and how I feel they're potentially going to be in 9.1. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Venthyr legendary, this is the one that I'm pretty excited about, one that I think might have the most potential depending on and tuning. Head wrap, or I guess whatever you want to call it, of the Contained Perpetual Explosion. Impending Catastrophe's final explosion damage is increased by 75% plus 15 for each enemy target hit on the way to its final target. The wording on this tooltip could not be any worse, because this legendary is incredibly convoluted and also a bit bugged right now, but I'll do my best to explain it. So without this legendary being equipped, we can launch an Impending Catastrophe at this target. It hits for, this is the actual impact damage. The dot ticks for about 423, give or take. It needs to calm down here. About 423, give or take. Now, this is a crit. Now, the initial wording on this legendary implied that it's this damage, because this is what we assumed was the final explosion. Explosion means it hits the mob. Explosion means it explodes and deals damage. That's what an explosion does. Look at a bomb. A bomb blows up and does damage. Like, this is like a big bomb. It doesn't apply a dot and do damage over time. So the wording of this is actually terrible. But either way, the damage increase on this legendary is not to the bomb explosion impact damage here. The damage increase actually is indeed applied to the dot. We'll cast it here in 8 seconds, and you'll see this dot will deal about, I think it was like 720 damage, give or take. Here we go. There's the explosion. That's the dot critting. There it is, 743. So it is indeed an increase to the dot's damage. This is good news, because looking at the damage breakdown here, the actual explosion does 0 damage. 8 million times 0, it won't, well, for the last few weeks, it's still been 0. The dot is dealing a substantial amount more damage though, which is good. Keep in mind, this effect is increased by 15% for each target the bomb, the big spirit bomb passes through before it hits your final target. So theoretically, I said, okay, it's hitting for about 743. It should hit for what? About 880, give or take. If I cast it from here, going through this target and hitting my end target. Well, when we did that, things didn't really work out the way we planned. So we'll wait 8 seconds here and launch the actual spirit bomb again. For what it's worth, the visual effect of this legendary, the visual effect of IC is insane. The best looking one in game. We'll cast the actual IC. It will go through this target. You'll see it like jiggle when it goes through it. Watch. It'll apply the thing. There's the damage. There's the explosion. But where's the dot? Oh, the dot's critting. Stop critting. The dot's not hitting for 90% damage increase. It's hitting for 489. Keep in mind, the first dot hit for 423 without the legendary on. So the legendary is bugged right now. This is a partial periodic hasted tick at the end here. Don't worry about this. The legendary is bugged right now. If you hit just one mob, it will deal 75% increased damage to that target. If it travels through a mob like this dummy and then hits a target, you're not getting the 75% amp. You're getting just 0 plus 15 or plus 15 times X, depending how many mobs it hits. So while it's cool that you have the 15% bonus damage amp per target hit, in a setting like this on PTR right now, you're not getting the baseline 75% damage amp plus 15 per target. Now we're going to hit this back one here. This is the skull. It'll hit all 3 targets. Hit this back one. Launch the catastrophe. Boom. Look at the actual dot damage here. 551, 552. It's the same on every single mob hit. So the final target does not take any kind of increased damage. It's split evenly amongst all of them. They all get the same 15 times X modifier. So while it's hitting for roughly 552 here per tick on each mob, which is actually not that bad. That catastrophe hit for what, 19k on 4 targets? This is without the 75% modifier if this bug has been properly deciphered on each mob here. So theoretically, this catastrophe should hit for about about like 35, about 32k, 33k on these 4 mobs. Keep in mind, there's also a conduit that Venthyr has, which increases the duration. I don't think I have it learned here, but it increases the duration of impending catastrophe by 50%, which means it's going to tick 50% more. So instead of dealing 35k, you're going to deal what, 55k, give or take. I'm Florida math here, boys, bear with me. But either way, it's going to deal a pretty substantial amount of damage, which is impressive in this setting. IC is still, I mean, the actual explosion damage is still undertuned, but the overall effect does a pretty fair amount of damage. Now, the one thing I will say about this effect that I'm not a big fan of is that when it comes to Mythic Plus, it's going to be a nightmare to try and leverage the actual stat bonuses or the actual, like, I guess, bonus damage from this effect. It is extremely finicky when it comes to the 15% for each enemy target hit on the way to its final target. Now, you would assume that right here, if I popped Impending Catastrophe and put it on, let's say, this mob here, maybe even this mob here or this mob, that it would probably factor in, okay, these are within a yard of each other, we'll give them the explosion damage, we'll give them the bonus 15% damage. But it doesn't do that. You have to literally hit the mob in the back of the pack. Even if they're this close, within a yard of each other, it will not factor in these 3 damage amps unless you hit this one specifically. If you hit this, you get 1 amp. If you hit this, I assume you get 2. Probably 3 with this, maybe even just 2 depending on the placement here. You have to hit the back mob. In Mythic Plus, you're not just standing like this the whole time. Mobs are moving. Taking mobs in Modern WoW is a nightmare. They always run behind you anyways in the first place. It's going to be so incredibly hard to leverage this actual damage effect. It was hitting for roughly 522. If we hit this front one here, you'll see it hits for less damage. It's gonna hit like 450 probably, something like that, give or take. 488. So that's my main complaint with this legendary. I wish it was like something along the lines of maybe like every target hits within 2 or 3 yards. That would be okay. That's where it makes sense with what it's supposed to be. Some big spirit bomb kind of effect. Maybe if it splashes onto a mob, it increases the damage dealt, because while this is a really cool effect, it has a lot of potential, the actual 15% value is going to be really hard to get in Mythic Plus, whether it's like a 2 mob pull or a 10 mob pull. There's a lot of potential value with this legendary, but in its current form, it's just going to be a bit of a nightmare and going to lead to some frustrating gameplay, I feel. All right, the moment we've all been waiting for, the Night Fae legendary. Decaying Soul Satchel. I knew the name before I even looked at it. Look at that. Each target affected by your soul rot increases your haste and critical strike chance by 5% for 8 seconds. This is the legendary that came out that said 50% for 8 seconds, which would equal 200% haste and 200% crit. Obviously, it wasn't going to happen. I mentioned that it was probably going to be either like 5% or 2.5%, depending on what's going on, because 20% haste and 20% crit is a lot on a 1 minute cooldown. Albeit it's an 8 second duration and not like 20 like PI, but it's 20% haste and 20% crit. I think people are forgetting about that crit part of it being mixed in. This is tied to your soul rot. This is a 1 minute power infusion of sorts for warlocks. Now, factoring this into some of the other changes that AF's gotten, mainly ignoring the single target changes, we know that AF's not the best in that setting. Looking at Sow the Seeds, things get pretty interesting. This is going to give you essentially every soul rot. It's going to give you essentially like a 1 minute burst window, whether it's in Mythic Plus or on raiding in certain fights with Sow the Seeds. This is incredibly powerful. Now, number one, I want to say here that it says 5% haste per target. So watch my baseline haste here. 24%. You would assume 44% because, 24 plus 20 is 44. But it's 48. Pop your Dark Soul. You'd assume 78. It's 93. It's multiplicative. You're at 93% haste popping this legendary and just your Dark Soul on its own if you have 24% haste. This effect is really strong. The multiplicative haste stacking is really, really big. It's really, really juicy. And look at the baseline stats we have too. We go up to like what, 185% mastery, give or take, depending on procs. 40% crit, 85% haste, 90% haste, 93% haste. If you're rocking a hymnal, your crit's even higher. If you pop your ruby, your crit's at what, 60%, something like that. This effect is very, very strong in AoE. In single target, it's not incredibly impressive. Yes, you had 5% haste and 5% crit with every soul rot. Does mean that every rapture window will be covered by that. When you're comparing it to something like synergy, it's consistent damage, but 5% haste and 5% crit for 8 seconds does not match 10% increased damage if the buff procs on you for 15 seconds. Synergy will be much better in single target if the effect procs during your rapture window. Even if synergy procs outside your rapture window, it's still very strong and probably arguably stronger than this during a rapture window. Keep in mind, synergy can also go on your pet, so there's multiple avenues where synergy is better. But what I'm looking at here is this in a Mythic Plus setting. This is going to be a very, very, very strong effect. It's going to make Locke sort of a much burstier class. Think back to Legion in a sense. I almost hate using that term because everybody says, oh, Legion AF, but I mean, it does feel sort of similar to that. Now, our single target damage has been hit in 9.1 on PTR, but that was sort of to be expected with the Rapture nerfs over and over. And the problem with Rapture, we've talked about it a million times. The problem with Rapture was that you would go into a pack and you're trying to, all right, precast your seed. Let's roll our agonies. Agony, 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 UA, haunt, soul rot, dark lair, and now we're going. The pack is dead. A fire mage has finished their combustion. LA shamans hit one button 10 times. Okay, I'm sorry, shaman. You know what I'm saying. The pack is dead. But this version of AF changes things as long as Sow the Seeds is relevant and it is a good source of damage, which we assume it's going to be. Instead of having all that and Rapture being your main spender, which needs more dots up for more damage, you run into a pack, you cast your Seed when the tank's running in, cast your Seed, you roll your Agonies and just start spamming. And Seed just cranks that damage out. Seed's not target capped. It's a soft cap of 20, but I mean, you're not pulling 20 mobs typically in plus. And if you are, well, most classes are soft capped at 20 on their larger abilities. It's just not very well known. Factoring this in with Soul Rot and Decaying Soul Satchel and the multiplicative stacking of Dark Soul and everything with it, these stat amps are utterly insane. You have a huge burst window every single minute, which is sort of like PS Soul right now, but just infinitely better. Now, talent-wise, I'm just going to play Drain Soul, Writhe, Sow, Haunt, and Dark Soul. I do think there's a world where you play Shadow's Embrace here at times. We did test with ID yesterday, sort of as like a meme kind of build. And while it did burst higher, you're going to want Drain Soul for shard sniping. It is what it is. Drain Soul is your de facto go-to shard builder in Mythic Plus, even on a handful of fights, and honestly, just in general. Drain Soul is the better playstyle. But putting all that aside, opener-wise, your damage can be it is really impressive. The multiplicative stat scaling of Dark Soul with Decaying Soul Satchel and popping your Ruby at the same time, your damage is really strong. Let's say opener wise here, I don't even have a pot. Let's say we go in, cast our Seed. I'm not even gonna roll drums here. We go in, cast our Seed, get Agonies rolling, give or take. There's that. Pop your Dark Soul. Let's roll this. Just pop a Ruby here. Go into our Soul Rot, hit that, and go. Look at our stats. 50% crit, 100 haste, 80 mastery, and just start spamming Seed, dude. You just spam Seed. You just spam Seed. And look at your damage breakdown here. We've hit 25k in these openers before. Look at the damage breakdown here. Seed crit 40% of the time. Soul Rot, 33. Agony, 35. Corruption, 46%. The multiplicative stat scaling, just the bonuses you get every single minute with this legendary being a thing, it's incredibly impressive. It's super strong. Plus you have access to playing Haunt still, which gives you that priority damage if you want. Whether you're playing Shadow's Embrace or Haunt, you have that, okay, maybe this is like a mini boss kind of pack. You can still get that insane Seed value out, but have your Haunt rolling on one target, have your UA rolling on one target, and that 20% amp of haste and crit just adds even more value to this. And you're going to be able to do this every single minute with Soul Rot being a thing. It's really impressive. And the fact that everything scales multiplicatively, you're at 93% haste with Dark Soul and Soul Rot up. That's it. I have 24 haste baseline, I believe, right around there. Like, yeah, 24 to 93% haste, 85% mastery, 50% crit. The damage output is really impressive, and you have this every single minute. In a mid-tier fortified, typically, or like a higher tyrannical key, this is going to be every single trash pack you have this. So AF is shifting away once again from having to cast your Seed into multiple Agonies, UA, Siphon, Haunt, Dark Lair, Soul Rot, Rapture, to just Seed, Agonies, go. The damage profile shift is this damage profile is what I want to see in Plus. And I don't like using the term Legion AF. I liked it, sure, because it gets everybody all riled up, but it really does feel like it. The single target damage aspect of it is not as good. We know that, but that's partially due to the Rapture nerf, so just for a lot of reasons, but there's that. If you really are looking for more single target damage as well, you could play Siphon Life over Writhe and Agony. I don't see a huge reason to play AC most of the time with Sow the Seed, just because you're spamming Seed so often unless you're in a niche setting. But you can still play Siphon over Writhe, and if you're playing Rolling Agony, which we are here, it's not that hard to actually maintain Siphon in 4+ targets. It might not be what everybody wants to do, but it's still totally doable. You can pre-cast your Seed, get a couple Agonies rolling. Once again, you can Dark Soul here, I'm a little lazy, do it early here. UA, we can go into this, pop our Ruby, and like, you'll see how much time we have just to sit here and like just spam Seed. We're at 5 charges. Look at all our dots here. We're playing Rolling Agony, permanent corruptions with Seed spam. And while it might not be as fast of an opener, it will bring more single target damage to the actual build. Start catching actual Siphons here, catch that, bang bang. Agonies are falling, corruption's permanent, you're spamming Seed. It's totally doable. In a key, like maybe like a Spires of Ascension or something like that, where you're looking for more of a tyrannical single target-esque kind of profile, this build is totally playable. And I'll be honest, it feels better than playing Siphon now, because you have a more upfront bursty profile. It feels good. Decaying Soul Satchel is very good in AoE, great for AF, not bad for Destro either. It's not as strong, but you still have, because you still have that 3-minute Infernal, you're not playing Wilfred's, but you have it for every single Infernal. And having that burst damage, pairing it with like Reign of Chaos, whether you're playing it or not, if you're playing the big Inferno, Soul Conduit, Reign of Chaos build, that haste amp is really, really, really strong. Insane for AF, good for Destro. Demo sort of because once again, you have your 1.5-minute Tyrant, which doesn't pair very well with this. But hey man, at a certain point, I would assume we get into double legendary territory. And if that's the case, and this stays the same, dude, Decaying Soul Satchel is going to be utterly insane. I am so excited to play AF and Mythic Plus in 9.1, and even venture into a little bit of Destro and Demo play. And most of that is due to Decaying Soul Satchel and the Seeds buff. Now, unfortunately for Kyrian Warlocks, I don't have a Kyrian Warlock on PTR, and there's no way to swap Covenants on PTR, so we have to just talk about it. But I'm going to be honest, Languishing Soul Detritus, whatever this word is again, is not incredibly impressive to me personally. I believe it had a higher crit chance initially. It might have even been 100%, but I'm not incredibly excited about this effect. It's cool in theory, but the problem is that it says when Scouring Tithe generates soul shards, you gain 100% speed and 40% crit for 8 seconds. Yes, Destro, Chaos Bolt scaling, I get it, I know that. But the problem is that when Scouring Tithe generates soul shards, that means the mob has to die, which also puts Scouring Tithe on cooldown and doesn't reset the CD. So it makes sense, but number one, in patchwork fights, this legendary is dead. It is literally a dead legendary. I hate legendaries like that. They're so frustrating. I know some are better in certain spots than others, and this could probably be abused a bit more than others in certain spots, but I can't stand legendaries or effects or whatever like that. They're so incredibly frustrating. Now, there is an upside to this. If you're Kyrian, you know you can Havoc Scouring Tithe. So for example, let's say we're attacking these two mobs here. If I put up my Havoc and went Scouring Tithe on both, we'll say Immolate is Scouring Tithe. If this mob here dies, I'm getting 5 shards from this Scouring Tithe being active. So I'll get the 5 shards, but this is still ticking. If this mob does not die, I'll get the cooldown reset as well as getting the shards from this mob. So meaning you'll get the actual bonus from the legendary effect and get the reset and be able to do it again. That's really cool. That's really exciting. It's not terrible in like AoE multi-target. It's not terrible in single target, but it just depends on ad spawning and ads dying. Now, looking at Sanctum of Domination, there are a few fights where you might be able to do that. The 9 comes to mind with the ad in phase 1, but phase 2, it's pure single target. You can't really do anything else. I have the Jailer as a disaster, and I mean, like, for this legendary, and it's not gonna be worth the value. Remnant of their Azul, it sounds like it could be good, but the orbs on their Azul, they don't die when they hit 0% health. They die when they're thrown off the edge, which, well, no value. Soul Render, you can get value in ads here. Might not be a terrible option. Painsmith, maybe, but like it's gonna be on orbs rolling at you, or it's gonna be ads in phase 2, or you're doing irrelevant damage. Guardians, Patchwork, Fate Scribe, you can get decent value probably with a tank ad, or the, I guess, off tank ad, whatever you want to call it. KT is a really good option for this legendary potentially because there's so many ad spawning so often. You're most likely going to have an ad present when it comes off cooldown, whether it be your Havoc or your Scouring Tithe, to go into again. And Sylvanas looks like a pretty heavy AoE fight in certain phases and Patchwork and others. So there's potential, but I have to say, as far as Destro's concerned, you have like Destro is the main thing for this build. Like Demo, not crazy interested, and Affliction, once again, not really, because you can't really do a whole lot of tricks with it. But Destro already has good legendaries for most of these fights and just everything in general. I mean, you've got Wilfred, you want to play it in Plus, which is the 2-minute build. You've got Madness, which is great and permanent 2 target cleave, and you've got Cinders, which is just good everywhere. Cinders is just like universally great for Destro. It's good in Havoc windows, it's good in single target, it's good in AoE, it makes the spec play faster, feel better. I just don't really see this effect being very strong, and you have Synergy too, if you want to play that for whatever reason. I just don't see this effect being played in many places unless it's changed. And honestly, like I said, I hate legendaries that are super linear, so not crazy impressed with this legendary. Maybe it's changed, but at this point, I'm not holding my breath. Thanks for watching, dudes. By the way, I just realized my hair is a mess in this video. I don't know what I was doing with it, so ignore that. I'm getting old. I don't probably want to have it for many more years anyways. Either way, hopefully this video gave you a better idea, understanding of how these legendaries actually look, interact, and are probably going to play out when 9.1 actually goes live. I am really excited for Decaying Soul Satchel. It's everything that I hoped it would be. The changes to the seeds with AF and the legendary haste crit damage and multiplicative scaling, dude, it's gonna be insane. I'm really excited for it. Even for Destro too, can be really good. The Venthyr one has a lot of potential if the actual ability is buffed, but I am looking at, you know, history, and I don't think it's gonna work. I don't think it's gonna happen. The potential is there, but with IC still not doing a whole lot of damage, I'm not really holding my breath. Kyrian one, whatever. The Necrolord one actually looks pretty decent for Destro. Okay for AF, not crazy exciting for Demonology due to like additive scaling and stuff, but still, we'll see where it goes. There's still time for more PTR changes. Let me know what you guys think of the legendaries in the comment section below. Any questions, drop them down there. I'll be sure to get back to you. Any weak ORS profiles or add-ons you see here, you can grab for free off my Twitch. If you want to swing by, hang out, ask any questions anytime, feel free to do so. Once again, huge shout out to my patrons. Thank you so much for all the support, guys. Heads up, the 9.1 Warlock Sanctum Domination spreadsheet is indeed now live. The tier 3 Felgar rank on my Patreon does indeed get early access to that. If you're interested, feel free to take a look. Thank you so much, dudes. I'll catch you all again soon on stream. Peace.